party. Caressing on your good body, like that, back of mine.
Mic check, mic check.
Maybe this is hard, I don't wanna lie. Sitting the stars, baby, you and I. So let's just say that I know what this could be. And we will never see unless we try. It's either we gon' fly or we gon' drown. Don't know how this gon' play. All I can say is that I'm not down. I don't regret it.
What's going on? I'm about to do a panel in a second. Would you mind asking me during the panel? Thank you. Mic check, mic check, mic check. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Woods. I'm going to show you all a bit about the 360 Reality Audio Walk Mix Creator. This is a plugin software that works in any DAW, and it allows for immersive audio creation, playback, and rendering for multiple systems, including any speaker system and headphones. Specifically, the speaker system we have set up here is 13 speakers, so that's 5 speakers at head height, 5 speakers above you, and then 3 below you. We also have everything bass managed by 2 subs. We have a crossover frequency at 85 hertz. That's just so we can get pretty loud in here. But with our format, since it's all object-based, you can set up whatever speaker system you want, and it will render to that speaker system. This is a mix I did for Berhana on Berhana's latest album called The Nomad's Dream. And this album it has already been released, but we're also going to be doing a 360 Reality Audio release in March of this year. So I'll just play back this song for a little bit. So again, this is the 360 Reality Audio Walk Mix Creator. Right now we're playing back on a 13 speaker environment. So that's 5 speakers at head height, 5 above you, and 3 below you. Since our format is all object-based, it renders to any speaker layout. Right now we're playing back with Genelec 8330s, and those are bass managed by 2 subs here as well. You can see the specific speaker layout I have set up right here. And for your specific speaker layout, you can type in different values for azimuth, which is angle left and right, elevation, which is angle up and down, and then radius, which is distance from the listening position. What's awesome about our software is it does delay compensation for you inside the software. So it is great to do your own tuning, of course, for your speaker system, so that all your speakers are completely flat in frequency response and they respond to the resonance that your room creates. That being said, a lot of the tuning that happens actually happens within the positioning of your speakers. So if you keep all of the speakers in the same radius, it makes everything phase aligned in positioning. So you don't have to do micro delays between different channels. If you have speakers that are a lot closer to you than other speakers, you have to do delays for the closer speakers to make sure that the arrival time of each speaker is at the same time. So when all the speakers are phase aligned in positioning, those micro delays don't have to happen. And oftentimes with those micro delays, you actually get phase issues, which can cause for a differentiation and lower volumes if you put something in a phantom image between 2 speakers. So if the phase is aligned in the positioning, you get a much more accurate monitoring environment. So a lot of the tuning is actually happening within the placement of the speakers. We are a little bit limited by this setup here, so it is a little bit more of a rectangle. That being said, our traditional setup is 13 speakers with a constant radius. So this plugin, I'll show you a little bit about the routing of this session, and then I'll show you how to make a session from start to finish as well. So the way our plugin works, and here's the mixer window, it intercepts the audio from the track. So the way I have everything routed here is I have all of these audio tracks all routed to aux buses. And then at the aux level, I have the plugin. So every single audio track is routed to an aux track, which becomes a sound object and is named as the same name as the audio track itself. What this allows me to do is control the volume from the audio tracks themselves, from the faders on the audio tracks, rather than having to control it within the plugin. Because the plugin is pre-fader, it intercepts the audio before the fader amount is applied. So I'm able to now, with these audio tracks, I'll just turn this down so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm actually able to control the amplitude from the audio tracks themselves rather than just the plugin. And this is more of a traditional workflow within a DAW, of course. But you'd notice that if you put the 360 Walk Mix Creator directly on the audio track, the meters will not show up. So I have everything routed to the aux tracks for that exact reason. It also allows me to do sends, which is very important. So I have some surround delays with a little bit of like flanging, so there's a little bit of movement behind you. And I also have a bus that's called stereo. What this does is it's a send to the center, and I have a little bit of a compressor on it just to make sure that the phase relationship is good with the rest of what's going on as well. But it gives you focus. You'll notice that oftentimes you start moving your stems around in the sphere and you lose sense of the mix. You lose sense of focus, and things become, you start looking around and understanding the mix. But I like to have the mix stagnant in front of you and then moving around you as well. So I usually have a send for most of the entire mix to the left and right speaker, just to allow you to focus in on the mix itself, but also giving you more definition to the height speakers as well. Another big part of my immersive mixing process is mastering the stems themselves. So usually when I get stems from an engineer, they're mixed stems, so they don't go through the 2-channel mix bus. And what that does is I have to recreate the reference and apply that processing. Usually I use Ozone personally because it's one plugin. I can load a bunch of different compressors, limiters, EQs, etc. And then I apply that to every single stem. And that helps me achieve loudness and definition. You'll notice if you just take the mix stems and you start throwing them around the sphere, everything sounds a bit dull. And that's because you're not taking master stems. You're literally taking stems that haven't been applied through a mix bus at all. So it's really important to achieve loudness and definition through mix bus processing prior to starting to work in immersive, in my opinion. Another really good way to do this as well, if you do want to do compression to everything, you can sum all audio tracks to one mono channel. And what that does is it gives you a sidechain input that you can link compressors to. So you can achieve the same kind of effect that you achieve in stereo in immersive by sidechaining compressors at the object level to one mono signal. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you want your mix to be really dynamic, I wouldn't do that. If it's jazz music, I would not do that. If it's hip hop, it's really important to do that, or else it will not sound glued together. So it's really good to have that glue of that sidechain input. So there's a lot of different ideologies that come about in immersive. A lot of them relate to the stereo process as well, but a lot of them are much different. You can have two different objects that have similar frequency responses in different locations and they don't clash, while in stereo they would completely mask each other. So you can have vocals come from behind you and in front of you, and if they're in stereo, you kind of hear them as one vocal, but in immersive, you hear every single thing. You can hear breaths, you can hear people make mistakes, and honestly, it achieves more humanity in music. Gives you back that dynamic range, which is really great as well. Does anyone have any questions so far about what I'm talking about? No? So I would just ask if Atmos is only functional at 48K. And 48K is an immersive audio standard, and that's because it's a film standard. So immersive audio was originally created with film in mind. That being said, 360 is more of a music-based format, and that's just because we're focused on the way you listen. That's why we're focused on having the radius consistent. We also don't have an LFE traditionally in our format. And the reason we don't have an LFE is because we believe in full frequency response from all the speakers. So we want to make sure that you have a flat response as in any monitor speaker, rather than having a heightened bass. So I was just asked if I need to convert from 192 or 96. For 360, yes, you need to convert. We're working on 96K support. We're not quite there yet. But eventually we will be able to work in 96 and 360, yes. That is a goal, definitely. Any other questions so far? Okay, so does everyone understand why I have all the audio tracks routed to the aux tracks for 360? That makes sense? Okay, good. So within this plugin, there's a multitude of different functions. You have the ability to change the azimuth, which is the angle, the ability to change the elevation and width. You can also adjust your gain. You can turn on and off headphone monitoring. And you can also import custom HRTFs. HRTF stands for Head-Related Transfer Function. It's a profile for how you hear in an immersive speaker environment. So when you import your custom HRTF, it sounds like you're mixing in the studio in headphones. We actually have a software called Virtual Mixing Environment as well, which is another custom HRTF software, and that 100% replicates the speaker environment for headphones. I actually did this deliverable from start to finish in VME. I QC'd a couple times in speakers to make sure everything was good, there was no distortion, but I barely had to make any EQ or level changes with what I was doing in VME because it's that accurate. Here are the different speaker layouts that come standard with the plugin. So let's say you already have an immersive layout. You can go ahead and just route from the plugin speaker channels to output channels. Specifically, we're monitoring on a 13 speaker layout right now. So I'm going to quit this session from here, and I'm just going to start a session fresh and show you all how to start mixing with WalkMix. Just give me 1 minute while I load the session. So our plugin works in any DAW, most popular DAWs, Ableton, Studio One, Logic, any DAW you guys use, it'll work in. So the first thing you want to do when you open up a session, you want to make sure you're in 4824. If you're not in 4824, the plugin will not work. You also want to make sure that you are at 1024 buffer size. It's really important. So you're saving CPU power. It functions a lot better with our plugin. You also want to make sure that the playback engine of the DAW is separate than the playback engine of the plugin. And the reason is, if you have the same playback engine with the DAW and the plugin, you're limited to the master fader channel count. In 360, you can use standard stereo routing. So you don't need to do anything special. You can literally just have your stereo mix and start working in 360. I would master your stems first, like I said before, but if you want to, you can go ahead and get started right from your stereo mix. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I start in 360, obviously I check my sample rate, because you never know. Then I go to the master channel, and I apply Walk Mix Creator. So when I open up Walk Mix Creator, it says, is this plugin on your master track? I say, yes, it is. So then I am going to go ahead and apply Walk Mix to every track. The only way you can do this is every track has the same channel count. If you have some mono tracks and some stereo tracks, you need to do all the mono tracks at once and all the stereo tracks at once, because the plugin only recognizes the channel count of some of the tracks that you're loading. So you want to make sure that you're only doing your stereo tracks at once. If you have some 5.0 or 5.1 tracks, you want to do those all at once, etc. All my my tracks are stereo, so I can go ahead and load everything all at once. Okay. So now everything's going to be coming out of the left and right speaker. I'm going to go ahead and press play, turn it down a bit. So you'll notice that in immersive audio, specifically 360, the frequency response completely changes based off of position. And that's partially due to how we hear, but it's also due to the speaker layout. So most LFEs are on the ground. Most sub-channels are on the ground, is what I mean to say. So if I take the 808, let's solo the 808 here. Right now, I have the objects positioned in the stereo layout. But let's say I were to move them lower. So you hear how much more low frequency you get from when you bring it down? So any kick, any 808, you really want to have a little bit lower because it will hit your sub-channel much harder. So I'll do the same thing with the kick. So I do want a little bit more high frequency from the kick so it sticks out, so I'm going to keep it like a little bit higher. So I'm cool, I'm happy with that. Hats I like to have, higher frequencies I like to have up in the sphere, just because it kind of makes sense to me personally. I see the sphere as a sort of frequency chart, right? So lower frequencies are lower in the sphere, higher frequencies are usually, for me, higher in the sphere. You can also click on these objects and move them if you like, but I like to be really exact, so I usually make my movements within these parameters here. You can also type the numbers. So with elevation, positive is above you, negative is below you. With azimuth, positive is to your left, and negative is to your right. Directly behind you is both plus and minus 180 degrees. So to the right is negative, so negative 180, and to the left is positive, positive 180, and they meet together here. Now let's say I have some piano. Let's do this piano here. Now let's say I wanted to add some reverb to that. When I add reverb, I like to do multi-channel reverb. And the reason is, if you have reverb and you just put it behind you, it doesn't make any sense. If you're in a room, you hear reverb all around you. You don't just hear reverb behind you. So it seems very artificial when people just put reverb behind you, because if there's dry signal in front of you and reverb behind you, then are you just hearing the back of the room? Have you ever been in a concert and you just hear the back of the room? No, right. So you hear all of the room. So you want to make sure you're using multi-channel reverbs. That's super, super important. So what I'm going to do with this piano is I'm going to assign this to a bus, and I'm going to put walk mix on that bus, and I'm going to name this piano. Now from here, I can do a send to another track. You want to make sure walk mix is on that track. And on this send, I'm going to do some verb. So I jumped the gun a little bit. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to make this a surround track. And this will allow me to instantiate. I have Logic set up as 5.1, just because our format is based off of a 5.1 standard. So I like to have reverb that makes sense with the format I'm working in, of course. So now you'll notice, I'm going to call this verb. And let's add some verb here. This is just the stock Logic verb. So now let's go to walk mix and let's solo the verb and the high piano. Now, the way that the signal flow works with walk mix is any plugin applied before the plugin, you will hear. So any EQ, any reverb, any effect that you want, you apply it before the plugin, you will hear that. So let's say I want to make that reverb louder. I can't really quite hear what's going on back there, so I'm just going to turn up the gain right before the verb. So now you should be hearing the verb all the way around you. So that's how you create reverb in 360 RA, which is a really important part. I wouldn't go too crazy with the verbs. Sometimes I hear immersive mixes and it just sounds like a stereo mix with reverb on it. So be really careful with that. You do want to make sure that there are specific objects around you, so you actually get the ability to understand the difference in perception and frequency from different elements, because we're not summing into 2 channels. We're not hitting a master limiter. We're able to get dynamic range and fidelity back in music because we're not pushing everything into 2 different channels. We're not summing things. Instead, we're summing them at the object level into different speakers. So does anyone have any questions so far? So now let's just quickly go over the export process, which is some things that people don't really understand about immersive audio, but luckily with our plugin, it's really, really simple. So with our plugin, all you need to do is open up the plugin, go to settings, and you need to check this icon right here. This is the export folder. So you want to make sure that you are bouncing your mix in the exact export folder that is located in the plugin itself as well. So this says Documents 360 Walk Mix Creator Export. So now I'm going to go into Logic and bounce my session. You want to make sure, of course, you're bouncing 24-bit 48K. And this is in my documents, WalkMix Creator Export, bounce. Oh, let me name it something else. Obviously, you want to make sure everything's unsoloed as well. So you want to make sure the plugin's on, everything's unsoloed, so you're hearing the whole mix, and you want to bounce to that exact export folder. So those are the three really important things. You'll notice that when you have the bounce, it'll tell you where you're peaking at. As long as you don't hear distortion and it's not too far above 0, you're okay. If you hear distortion in your export when you're QCing it, go back and change it. We also have a limiter as well that I'll go over. So with these export functions, we have a lot. And the main reason we have a lot is because we want to be able, for you to be able to distribute and render into different formats. So the first format is MPEG-H, and that's a compressed format. And what that allows you to do is deliver directly to DSPs. So there are 3 different levels of MPEG-H, and each level has a different amount of pre-render objects. And this depends on your bandwidth in your wireless connection. So if you have a very weak signal, you're going to be listening to level 0, which is 5 object pre-render. So it takes all of your sound objects, renders that into 5. If you have a very high connection, you have level 3, which is 24. So it goes between 5 and 24. Specifically, level 0 is 5, level 1 is 10, 2 is 16, and 3 is 24 pre-render objects. If you want to go really nerdy, each object has a bit rate of 64 kbps. So level 3 would be 1,536,000 bits per second. We can talk more if you guys want to learn about that stuff. SAM Wave is a Sony-specific ADM. It's a SAM file with WAV files, and it follows the same pre-render levels as well. Unprocessed is a SAM Wave with all of the object metadata up to 128. Speaker channels is whatever speaker layout you had configured in the plugin. You will get mono wave files per channel, which is really helpful for post-production, so you use limited CPU while you're doing video overlay. This is really, really helpful when you have video in Pro Tools or whatever DAW you use, and you're playing that back along with immersive audio. 13 speaker channels is mono channels per speaker, mono wave files per speaker. Headphone channels is the binaural render. ADM is an audio definition model. It is a singular ADM BWF wave that has multiple mono waves along with location metadata. These also have the pre-render levels, and then the master ADM is up to 128 mono wave files inside the one ADM BWF. So that's our different export types. Then you press OK, export that out, and the main deliveries to DSPs would be those MPEG-H files, the unprocessed, and the headphone channel. And headphone channel would allow for a quick QC. You just send someone a 2-channel binaural render for them to listen to on headphones, and it works with any media player. So that's the export process. Really quick, I'll also go over the limiter. The limiter is fed by a mono sidechain signal. It sums every single object into one signal, and basically you're getting limiting based off of that one signal. This is your input gain. I personally keep the release at 300 or above, just because if you start going below 300, it gets a little choppy. And this is your output level, and then your look ahead as well. If you have your limiter on, you won't get distortion unless you're like really, really pushing it. But I personally like to kind of tickle the limiter. I don't like to go too hard into the limiter, and that's because if you really want to achieve loudness, you do that at the stem level. You don't do that through processing at the master level. As soon as you start really pushing that limiter and getting a sidechain effect, it makes me a little nauseous sometimes, and it also takes away the effect of immersion because you're not able to understand dynamic range between location. It's really important for you to have a difference in perception between what's behind you and in front of you, instead of it sounding like a big wall of sound closing in on you. Any other questions? Great question. So I was asked if this is happening at the mastering level. This usually happens after the stereo mix is done. The best immersive mixes, in my opinion, are done with the stereo mixer involved, because you really want to push the boundary. Someone who's mixing in the stereo environment. Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yes. Um, Oftentimes I'm given files that have already been mixed in stereo. Sometimes I'm doing the stereo mix myself. And when I'm doing the stereo mix myself, you can really push the boundary. I did a record with Mike a couple days ago. And we were able to really push the boundary because we had the artist Yana in here in the studio with us. And she told us where she wanted her vocals to be and how much she wanted the instruments to move. And if you don't have the artist with you, you can't really push the boundary because you don't want to make it a gimmick. But if the artist wants it to happen, you're going to make it happen. And you can make it sound really cool. So oftentimes, if you don't know the artist very well, you end up being pretty conservative in the immersive mix, which detracts from the deliverable at the end of the day, because you really want to push it. I don't like to make objects move too much. I like to have movement happen at the stem level, because it keeps you focused. So I have like tremolos or flanging or some sort of spatial effect like an XY mic emulation or something to make it seem like it's moving without you like understanding it. It just adds to the feeling. You're creating a feeling. Exactly. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much.